There are moments in every woman's life when she hears something that makes her pause, something that feels off, but she can't quite put her finger on why. These aren't obviously harmful statements. They're wrapped in normalcy, sometimes even sweetness. But beneath the surface lies something far more dangerous. What you're about to discover might change how you view certain conversations forever, because recognizing these patterns early could be the difference between preserving your peace and losing yourself in someone else's emotional chaos. Carl Jung, the brilliant Swiss psychologist, taught us about the shadow, that hidden part of our psyche where we bury the traits we refuse to acknowledge. In relationships, this shadow often reveals itself through seemingly innocent phrases that carry manipulative undertones, emotional irresponsibility, and a refusal to grow. The ancient Stoics understood that our environment shapes who we become, and if the person closest to you consistently uses language that diminishes your power, you're not just hearing words, you're being slowly programmed to accept less than you deserve. Today we'll explore 5 specific phrases that should immediately raise your awareness, not because we're looking for conflict, but because sometimes the most dangerous games are played with the softest voices. Seneca once observed that we don't have a short time to live. We simply waste much of it. And often we waste it on people who don't deserve our energy. Pay attention to what comes next, because each phrase we'll examine carries psychological weight that goes far beyond its surface meaning. The first phrase sounds almost romantic in its vulnerability. When a man says you have to accept me as I am, your heart might initially respond with warmth, thinking here's someone being authentic, someone brave enough to be real. But listen deeper. This statement becomes dangerous when it's used as a shield against growth, when it appears after you've noticed troubling behaviors, emotional manipulation, or consistent irresponsibility. Carl Jung believed that true self-knowledge begins with honest self-examination, but he also made it clear that real authenticity requires the courage to evolve. When someone hides behind, "That's just how I am," to avoid change, you're not witnessing authenticity. You're seeing someone who has chosen stagnation over growth. The phrase usually emerges once you've already identified patterns that concern you, perhaps passive-aggressive behavior, emotional unavailability, or a tendency to blame others for their reactions. When you try to address these issues, suddenly you're the problem for not accepting them as they are. But here's what they're really saying: I refuse to do the inner work that healthy relationships require. Marcus Aurelius taught that the perfection of character involves living each day with intention, without laziness, without pretense. A conscious woman who has committed to her own development shouldn't carry the emotional burden of someone who refuses to examine their own behavior. Being in such a dynamic is like trying to dance with someone who won't move their feet. You end up doing all the work while they remain perfectly still. True acceptance in a relationship means seeing someone's flaws and choosing to love them while they actively work on themselves, not enabling harmful patterns under the guise of unconditional love. Remember, the Stoics believed that we become like those we spend time with, so if your partner consistently resists growth, they're not just limiting themselves, they're creating an environment that could limit you too. The next time you hear this phrase, don't be charmed by its apparent vulnerability. Ask yourself whether this person genuinely reflects on their behavior, or whether this is simply a sophisticated way to avoid accountability, because someone who truly wants to grow will show it through actions, not through demanding acceptance of their refusal to change. The second phrase might initially sound like someone processing their past experiences. When a man says, "All my exes were crazy or toxic," you might think he's just had bad luck in love. Maybe he's been unfortunate enough to encounter several unstable people. But pause for a moment and consider the mathematical probability of this being true. According to Stoic philosophy, Real personal growth begins with honest self-examination. Epictetus taught that it's not events that disturb us, but our interpretation of them. If someone consistently blames all their former partners for relationship failures without ever examining their own contributions, you're witnessing a pattern of victimhood and projection. Carl Jung explained that what we don't make conscious ends up controlling us from the shadows. Men who speak poorly of every previous relationship are often projecting their own unresolved issues, their own emotional immaturity, their own resistance to taking responsibility. This phrase reveals the mindset of someone who needs to be the victim in every story, who dramatizes the past while unconsciously expecting you to be the exception, the one person who won't disappoint them. But here's the deeper truth. No one escapes their shadow unless they're willing to face it. If someone has never taken responsibility for their part in past relationship conflicts, what makes you think they'll suddenly develop that capacity with you? Jung taught that what we deny ultimately controls us. Being with someone who refuses to acknowledge their emotional responsibility is like building a foundation on unstable ground. No matter how much love and effort you invest, the structure will always be shaky. The most concerning aspect is that eventually, the story he tells about his previous partners will become the story he tells about you. Someone who needs to play the victim will always find someone new to blame when the relationship innovates challenges. This is where emotional wisdom becomes essential. Look beyond the surface narrative. Has he ever discussed what he learned from past relationships? Has he ever acknowledged his own mistakes or growth areas? Or does his story always position him as the innocent party who was wronged? If he's never taken responsibility before, there's no reason to expect he'll start now. You're not here to heal broken men who don't want to heal. You're here to build something meaningful with someone who walks beside you, not someone who drags you into their unresolved drama. The third phrase might sound like a declaration of love, but it's actually one of the most insidious forms of emotional manipulation. When someone says, "If you really loved me, you would do what I ask," they're not expressing affection. They're weaponizing your feelings to gain compliance. The Stoics understood that genuine love cannot be demanded or coerced. It must be freely given based on mutual respect and admiration. Epictetus taught that no one can control your emotions unless you grant them that power. This phrase is designed to turn your natural desire to please someone you care about into a tool for control. Carl Jung wrote extensively about power dynamics in relationships, particularly how insecure individuals often disguise their need for dominance as expressions of love. When a man uses this phrase, he's drawing an invisible line that conditions your worth on your compliance. He's essentially saying, "Your love is only valid if you do what I want," which isn't love at all. It's emotional blackmail, wrapped in romantic language. An emotionally mature woman must develop the clarity to distinguish between a genuine request and manipulation disguised as vulnerability. Giving in to this type of emotional pressure might feel like an act of love in the moment, but over time, you begin losing essential parts of yourself, your boundaries, your authentic voice, your personal power. The most dangerous aspect is the escalating nature of these demands. At first, it might be something small, a test to see if you'll prioritize his wishes over your own judgment. Then the requests become larger, more frequent, until you're no longer sure whether you're acting from love or from fear of losing his approval. Here's what's really happening. When someone uses emotional blackmail, they're not building a relationship. They're slowly dismantling your sense of self. If you find yourself in conversations where someone makes you feel guilty for having boundaries, for protecting your time, your energy, or your values, you're dealing with someone who confuses love with possession. Carl Jung taught that healthy love is neither possessive nor manipulative. It's a conscious act of shared freedom, where both people can grow and express themselves authentically. Remember, if you've been following along, you're already developing a deeper understanding of these patterns, and that awareness is your first line of defense against emotional manipulation. If this content is helping you see relationships more clearly, consider subscribing, because we dive deep into psychology and personal growth in ways that can genuinely transform how you navigate life's most important connections. Your support helps us continue creating content that empowers women to trust their intuition and build relationships based on mutual respect rather than emotional games. Now, let's continue with an even more destructive phrase. The fourth statement might be the cruelest because it attacks your very essence. When someone tells you you're not enough for me, they're not offering constructive feedback. They're attempting to dismantle your self-worth at its foundation. Carl Jung explained that many people project their inner dissatisfaction onto others rather than doing the difficult work of examining their own emptiness. This phrase is pure projection. When a man tells you that you're inadequate, he's revealing his own distorted expectations, his constant need to feel superior, his inability to appreciate what's actually in front of him. He's trying to make you feel small, so you'll become dependent on his validation, constantly working to earn approval that will never truly come, because the standards keep shifting. Stoic philosophy reminds us that our genuine worth doesn't depend on external judgments, but on our character, our actions, our inner integrity. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Do not let another person's soul rule over yours." And that's precisely what this phrase attempts to do: rule you through manufactured insecurity. Someone who consistently compares you, belittles your efforts, or suggests you're insufficient is trying to trap you in a game where you'll always lose because the goalposts are constantly moving. Today you're not enough for one reason, tomorrow it's something else entirely, until you're left exhausted and questioning things you once knew with absolute certainty about yourself. A conscious woman doesn't beg for affection or spend her energy trying to prove her value to someone who's determined not to see it. You're not here to fit into anyone's ever-changing expectations. You're here to share your life with someone who recognizes your worth and inspires your growth, not your self-doubt. If you ever hear this phrase, pause, breathe deeply, and remember exactly who you are. Don't fall into the trap of believing you need to be more for someone who fails to recognize everything you already bring to the table. That insecurity isn't yours to carry. It belongs to him. As Jung observed, you cannot make someone see your light if they're only searching for shadows, and no amount of self-improvement will satisfy someone whose ego requires you to feel inadequate. External validation is fleeting and unreliable. True confidence emerges when you learn to validate yourself, trust your instincts, and live according to your own values rather than someone else's shifting standards. The greatest mistake you can make is allowing someone who uses your perceived weaknesses against you to define your worth. When a man says you're not enough, he's not being honest about you. He's revealing his own emotional poverty, his inflated ego, his desperate need to feel superior at someone else's expense. This statement doesn't seek truth or growth. It seeks to subject your mind and self-esteem to constant, unfair judgment. Carl Jung taught that what we don't make conscious becomes our destiny. So if you don't recognize these comments for what they are early on, you might find yourself trapped in a relationship where you're perpetually trying to prove your value. The Stoics also understood that no external opinion has real power over you unless you grant it permission. Marcus Aurelius put it perfectly when he said, "Your peace is worth more than any attempt to fit into someone else's mold. If a man consistently makes you feel inadequate, the wisest response isn't to stay and try to prove him wrong. It's to walk away with dignity, not out of pride, but out of genuine self-respect. Emotional discipline means refusing to allow empty criticism to destroy what you've worked so hard to build: your confidence, your clarity, your inner freedom. As Seneca taught, the greatest power is self-mastery, and that mastery begins the moment you decide not to accept emotional crumbs disguised as helpful feedback. Finally, we reach perhaps the most insidious phrase of all. When a man says, "Do whatever you want," with a passive-aggressive tone, cold sarcasm, or obvious resentment, he's not actually giving you freedom. Instead, he's setting an emotional trap, trying to make you feel guilty for making independent decisions while pretending to be generous and accommodating. He's not relinquishing control. He's disguising manipulation as permission, hoping you'll either change your mind or feel terrible about your choice. Carl Jung wrote about the hidden ways people manipulate from their shadow, and this phrase perfectly exemplifies that concept. He's not expressing his true feelings or communicating directly. Instead, he expects you to decode his real meaning. And if you don't, then comes the guilt, the silent treatment, or the passive-aggressive punishment. Stoic philosophy emphasizes that healthy relationships require clear, direct communication. Seneca summarized this beautifully when he said, "Speak in such a way that your words don't require interpretation." When someone communicates through riddles, implications, and emotional subtext, they're not really communicating, they're manipulating. These kinds of phrases place you in a constant state of uncertainty, where you find yourself trying to read between the lines, anticipate reactions, avoid triggering negative responses, until you realize you're living according to their emotions rather than your own authentic desires. Gradually, your peace of mind begins to erode as you become hyper-vigilant about their moods and reactions. A woman who has developed emotional intelligence should never participate in these games. The most powerful response to "do whatever you want" is to take the statement literally and act according to your genuine preferences without excessive explanation or apology. This single approach breaks the manipulative cycle and forces the other person to either mature into direct communication or sit alone with their passive-aggressive tactics because you're no longer available for emotional games. Both Carl Jung and the Stoics agree that living with clarity and authenticity leads to genuine freedom, and that freedom begins when you stop reacting to manipulation and start choosing your responses based on your values, choosing your words carefully, maintaining your boundaries, and deciding who deserves your emotional energy isn't cold or unfeeling. It's emotional intelligence in action. Responding with clarity, or simply walking away from conversations filled with hidden meanings and emotional traps, is a way to break manipulative patterns while drawing clear lines about what you will and won't accept. The Stoic approach to these situations is both simple and powerful. Don't waste energy trying to decode what someone lacks the courage to say directly. Ambiguity in communication is often a tool of control, and a conscious woman, like any wise person, will always choose clarity, consistency, and inner peace over emotional confusion. Stay true to your decisions, act with confidence, and never forget that a man who genuinely wants to be with you doesn't need to manipulate you, speak in codes, or create emotional confusion to get his needs met. Healthy love doesn't hide behind games or require you to be a mind reader. It shows up with transparency, direct communication, and mutual respect. Inner peace develops when your thoughts, words, and actions align harmoniously, and as we've explored throughout this discussion, those seemingly harmless phrases are actually clear warning signs that, if not recognized early, can lead you into relationships that drain your energy, compromise your focus, and diminish your very essence. Both Stoic philosophy and Carl Jung's psychological insights invite us to look beyond surface words to see underlying patterns, to protect our emotional stability with wisdom rather than naive hope, because ultimately, it's not about judging others harshly, it's about protecting the peace and clarity you've worked so hard to cultivate in your own life.